See? So all I told you about the fact that this boy wants to follow in his dad's footsteps. His dad is a wonderful doctor and very respected and all that sort of thing. And here's a boy who wants to follow in the same footsteps, and comes time for examination, and his coach in his freshman year makes it tough for college in his freshman year, and has made it tough for him every year. His father tells me he's been going through the same thing. And yet you see what a simple little thing will cause a situation like this. You know that the situation is solved and you don't have to worry about it anymore, huh? Feel good about it?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Good luck to you, kid. All right. Well, now we've got that part of it solved. Let's pause for a little bit for question. Yes, Ms. White.
Nothing, because on the first question again, why did you not give him a flashback like you did at the analysis session that we had?
Well, I don't know, because I didn't feel that was indicated in this case. I guess that's all.
I thought maybe there was a reason.
No, I knew what the problem was. You see, his father had discussed this with me at quite some length, weeks and weeks and weeks ago. And he says, is there anything that hypnosis has to offer that would solve the problem of his son? And I said, well, hypnosis would give him the stamina and the ability to go in there and take a test if he knows his subject. He said, I'm certain my boy knows his subjects. He says, it isn't that, but he goes into such a panic. He says, here's his problem. For years now, he'll read the questions on an examination through, and one of the questions will throw him. And immediately, his mind goes blank on all the others. Now, that's a pretty horrible situation for a kid trying to make pre-med school. And so when he told me about it, he said he's in St. Louis, and if I sent him up to class, would you see if you could help him? So he came one session late. He came 2 weeks ago after the hypnoanalysis session was over, and I couldn't work with him that session. So I asked him to come back today, and I would work with him. Now, he's had the best state of all to work with in hypnoanalysis, because this really gets right down deep under. Did you see how fast that episode came through? You see, there was no stalling for it. There was no waiting for it. Like in ordinary hypnoanalysis, you might have to wait for your answers. But when you create this state, you've got an immediately workable state, and you get your answers instantly.
Do a flashback to question 8.
Sure.
Oh, I didn't hear that. That's why I asked that.
Oh, I had him see each question. And I said, why are you so worried about algebra? And he came up with the answer.
No, but later he did say, now, anytime you get nervous, you remember question 8.
Oh, is that what you meant?
That's what I meant.
Of course, you remember question 8 in algebra.
And I wondered if you had a reason. That was my question.
Now, I want you to notice also the clarity with which the human mind retains everything that it has ever lived through. For instance, he could go through that whole examination paper and tell you every question and read it. Is that right? You could have read it right from the paper, because the paper was right before him in his own eyes. Is that? Am I telling you? Am I saying the truth, Pat? Yes.
Would you remember that right now? Since you've just gone through it, you wouldn't remember it now, would you?
I still remember question 8, yes.
You wouldn't remember question 3 now, would you? But you wouldn't, before you went up there?
Before I went up there, no, I hadn't done that test.
No. You see, when people begin to understand that hypnosis is a fabulous thing, not what people try to make of it magic and things like that, but if it is used for scientific things, used for medical things, and used to help kids in situations like this, there are so many ways. I think that an indication of the many ways it can be used is when we had a class in Indianapolis. Now, Indianapolis, despite the fact that we've had about 4 classes there, we've only had 1 psychiatrist in the Indianapolis classes. And this is usually not so. When we go back and back and back, pretty soon the psychiatrists start coming into this class in droves. The other day, a couple of weeks ago, when we had the hypnoanalysis session, we had a simply terrific session at Indianapolis. And the head of the state institution who is a bored man, not only asked to sign up for the course himself, but he said to Dr. Wise, who was one of my students, he said, Dr. Wise, would it be possible for you to come over to the state hospital and put some of our patients into the state in which Mr. Ellman is able to get such remarkable analysis? He says, well, in all the years I've been at the state institution, nobody has ever been able to do this with patients. Why? Because nobody would listen about hypnosis. Now they're beginning to listen. And I just think that psychiatrists miss out terribly when they don't study hypnosis. You ask the average psychiatrist, how is hypnoanalysis? Oh, that's terrible. It's no good at all. How is hypnosis? Ah, it's no good. It's no good. But get the psychiatrists who have been in our classes. Ask the men who use hypnosis in psychiatry. They won't tell you that hypnoanalysis is valueless. They'll say they can't get their colleagues to listen. But that isn't the subject today. Today the subject is attaching hypnosis to sleep. Now you saw it done 2 different times, and you saw how easy it is. And do you think now that you've got it, do you think you could do it? Do you want to see it again? Do you want to see it again? Now I'll tell you why I don't have each man practice individually on obtaining this state. Because of the fact that there aren't enough people to practice on. That's just it, because if one person obtains it, then the next doctor who obtains it is going to think, well, that's easy. But suppose 3 or 4 people reject the state. You must have deep somnambulism before you can expect to achieve it. Now, I'll tell you another thing that this indicates, and something that you should know before we leave this subject, and that is, I am not saying that first you hypnotize and then you get the sleep. Many of you doctors encounter sleeping patients in the hospital, so the first half of this can be eliminated entirely. They're asleep already. I had to produce sleep in Pat, and I had to produce sleep in Marcella, and so I had to hypnotize first and show you how to obtain sleep by a post-hypnotic suggestion. You can never attach sleep to hypnosis, but you can attach hypnosis to sleep. So therefore, that sounds so cockeyed I don't understand that myself. Well, how can I expect you to understand it? Let's simplify it. When you get to the hospital, we'll say, or the patient comes to your office, you might have a patient, we'll say, in the recovery room. And you might tell him to lie down for a little while. And that patient will take a snooze. And then, while they're asleep, you don't have to hypnotize them to make them go to sleep. They're asleep already. Add the hypnosis to the sleep. You can do that just as easily as I did it. So, I don't have that means. I don't have the hospital beds where the patients are already asleep when I come in. I must produce the sleep in order to produce hypnosis attached to sleep. Therefore, I have to use the techniques I know to produce a natural sleep. Pat, did you have a natural sleep?
I can't say. There was a balance between it. I could hear a couple of papers rustling.
Mm-hmm.
But actually, I sleep fairly soundly now anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Or between lightness and something.
Mm-hmm.
And I will wake up easily.
Yes, and you know why you wake up easily? Because you had a football coach in the first year of high school. That's the reason you don't sleep too soundly all night. Below the level of consciousness, that's bothering you. It won't bother you anymore. Marcella, did you have a good sleep? And you could tell the difference between hypnosis and the sleep, could you? Could you, Pat?
Yes.
Yes, okay. All right, I just want you to see that hypnosis and sleep are 2 different things, and don't confuse them. Don't make the mistake that the others make of calling hypnosis sleep. So they'll say to the patient, now sleep, deeper, 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 sleep, 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 and they haven't been producing sleep at all. Now, let's go back and try to make this statement over again that I said was so cockeyed. What I have tried to show you today... Yes, Pat, you want to say something?
When you first put me in the sleep state, I was sound asleep. I heard nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And it was very much like sleep. But when you added hypnosis to sleep, I became subconscious, conscious, I guess you might call it.
No, what happened is your awareness increased so much, you see. Hearing never vanishes. In the deepest sleep, you only think it's gone. We have been able, in certain hypnoanalyses that we have done, to take a person through the deepest anesthesia. They still retain their hearing. You only thought you weren't hearing when you were asleep. You actually hear at all times. In fact, if you were to take a motion picture of a person asleep and let a bug fly up against the screen or something, you'd see that person sound asleep, squirming asleep. He hears it, but he throws it out. Just like we don't notice the cars going by. But you play these tapes, and all of a sudden you hear 40 million cars going by that you didn't hear before. Why? Because now you're listening to the tape on which the sound is, and you've all noticed that thing. You listen to the hypnoanalysis records. In the room, we weren't paying attention to those sounds that came from the street. We were only paying attention to the patients. But you play the tape over again, and brother, you hear sirens and bells, and you hear everything, and we had a devil of a job trying to get that stuff out of the record. Hearing is always present. Yes, Dr.
On what you just talking about, I think this is real interesting. And, I mean, to me, it's very interesting. Anyway, this group I told you about that I took a little work with, I think I mentioned this to you. I had some patients come up who they put through into a deep state of hypnosis and took them back through surgery, where they had a general anesthesia for major surgery. And they took them right through this surgery during the whole procedure, and the patients knew what was being said during surgery, which just goes along with what you're saying. Even the very deepest state of sleep, they still hear.
Yeah, that's right.
And the impact of what was being said during the operation was still being perceived in the brain and recorded there. And they carried them through this surgery, and the patients could sit there and tell you exactly what was being said during the surgery, which for those of us who do surgery, it's a pretty good thought. That
Keep
if you
your
have
mouth
a lot to say, you are trying to keep it to yourself.
Yeah. Doctor, I have done this with hypnoanalysis patients who have a neurotic problem. Not a neurotic problem, but an illness. They've been sick ever since their operation. Anytime you hear one of those cases, I've been sick ever since my operation, suspect something happened in the operating room. And if you take them back in hypnoanalysis, you'll find that some doctor who thought they were out like a light, perhaps the anesthetist, because he thinks they're out like a light too. He doesn't know that the minute our brain stops working, we're dead. You get a little brain damage, doctor, and you're no good anymore. Isn't that right? Here is this a patient now who is complaining about the fact that she has been sick since she had the operation. Now you take her through the operation, take her through her anesthesia and her surgery, and you find out that one of the doctors made this stupid statement. My God, look at that horrible gallbladder. Boy, after this she'll never be the same. Now to her, she didn't attach that as meaning something good. She took that as meaning that she had to be sick after the operation. And below the level of consciousness, she didn't recall it. Consciously, it was buried way below the depths of consciousness. But that particular statement, when she recovered it in hypnoanalysis and heard them saying it, made her well again, because now she understood, or was given the insight, let me put it that way. Once I was able to give her the insight, she didn't have any more aches and pains after the operation. Oh, I'll tell you, this idea that people lose their hearing, that doctors have and anesthetists have. I've had anesthetists in my class who say to me, Mr. Ellman, do you mean to tell me that when a patient is really in the depths of the deepest anesthesia, that they can still hear? And I'll say, yeah. I don't believe it, says the man. And as a teacher, I say to myself, oh, brother, have I got a problem now? Letting that man know before this course is out how many wrong things a doctor can say in surgery. As a layman, can you imagine my problems in trying to teach doctors this? Can you see how you wouldn't have believed it until you saw it? When you saw it, if I could in every hypnoanalysis get at one of those patients who has been sick since the operation, and every doctor has a patient like that, I'm sure. I would love to do hypnoanalysis, and I'll venture to guess that everyone will be an iatrogenic illness caused by the stupid remarks of the nurses, the anesthetist, or the doctors in attendance, or somebody coming in and saying, my God, look what he's got. You people know that. And some of you aren't believing it even now. I mean, I know, I realize that. Because you haven't had enough proof yet. But here's a man who's seen the hypnoanalysis, a doctor who has seen the hypnoanalysis on such patients, and he tells you that that's so. But look, we're wasting time on not wasting time. God knows that isn't wasting time. Because if I get that fact across, I think I'd...
Well, years ago, 15, 20 years ago, that the bull was having music in the operating room and was worked up quite a bit, but it died for some reason or other. I don't know.
It died because a lot of skeptics didn't realize what they were doing for the patient. I can see such a thing doing a lot for patients.
Mr. Feldman, I just want to say one thing about this sleep. Mrs. Elman told me the first class that I came over here, you know, when you had your demonstration class this year, that you were aware of this, and I was waiting for you to bring it out. That was the fact that these pregnant patients, after they get so far along, can't get their respirations down because they don't have the capacity for it.
Oh, yes, I know that.
Yeah, I mean, you hadn't mentioned it here, and in obstetrics, I think that's important to know.
Oh, well, yes, well, usually doctors know that pretty well, don't they? Don't all doctors know that?
Well, I don't think so.
What?
I had to find it out for myself. See, I was having patients who I was waiting to get down to 7 or 8 respirations, and these gals who were 7, 8 months pregnant and who had large babies and so on, and I found out that about as low as I was getting was 12 or 13, but I found they were taking a beautiful state of hypnosis at 12 or 13.
Yeah,
I finally figured out, well, they just...
they can't get the respirations down. So did I get this from you? Thank you so much. I think that's important for every doctor to know, but I in my layman's ignorance, I figured that was just knowledge that every doctor had and that I didn't have to pound it home. In fact, you could imagine my surprise. I haven't very often tried to attach hypnosis to the sleep of a pregnant woman. And when a couple of them showed up in class, and we did use that state on them, and I saw that I could only get down to, as deep as I went, I could only get around 10, 11, 12, like you say. I would say to myself, well, why can't I do that to a pregnant woman? Then I would attach the state anyhow. And, brother, I would get as beautiful a state as Marcella had, or as Pat had. And you'd see it work beautifully.
May I bring up a question?
Yeah, sure you can.
Talking about them kinds of states, and doing a hypnoanalysis on headaches, do you find any of them going back to the birth episode?
No. The earliest I have ever been able to take a patient in hypnoanalysis, doctor, and I am supposed to know this subject perhaps as well as any living man, is to about 6 months of age, when the intellect first forms. I don't think the intellect is formed. I can't get them back of about 6 months. I've had this amazing thing happen where a mother has been in the room, and I've taken a woman, we'll say, of 28 or 30, back to her babyhood, and I've gotten her into a crib, playing with a rattle, which the mother said, my God, we threw that rattle out when she was 8 months old. How? And nobody's ever mentioned it since. There's no need to mention a baby rattle. And she says, how could she possibly describe it so accurately? But she described the baby rattle that she was putting in her mouth when she was about 6, 7 months old. Now, she might have done that maybe when she was 3 or 4 months old. I don't know when they start giving babies rattles and things. But that's the earliest we've been able to get them back. They don't go back.
7 or 8 years ago, I had a patient come to me who had headaches for a number of years, and I was taking the history on her, and then having her describe particularly where the headache was, and she was concentrating on it. And all of a sudden she said, well, my God, what's happening? I'm being born. And so she went through being born, and she hasn't had a headache since.
Boy, that's a remarkable case. I never had one like that, Doctor.
I didn't have her, I hadn't tried hypnosis or anything. I just merely taking the history of her. And having her describe in detail her headaches, and she was trying to
Was she
describe.
a forceps delivery, was she?
No.
So, the doctor over here says she's schizo.
Well, anyway, she didn't have any more headaches.
I know I've never had a case like that, and I don't know whether or not the intellect is sufficiently formed prior to birth. Maybe there's another thing on which we have the fallacy. Maybe they do have an intellect even before they're born. We know they have a brain. They're born with a brain, but is it working?
Well, I think they're perceiving at the time, but don't know what they're perceiving. But later on, when they learn what these things are, this mind suddenly hooks it up, and then they know what was happening and say it word.
No, but I've never been able to get them back that young.
When
I got them.
Dianetics was all the rage, they claimed you could go back into life in utero.
But that's so. They were doing that on such an unscientific basis, Doctor. That Dianetics thing was such. Just flare it up and flare down.
Yeah.
That's not the way I want to teach. I want to teach sound science. Yes.
We have a...
Wait a second, Doctor. His hand was up.
if I can throw a herring out here to dispute your statement, we can establish conditioned reflexes in the nursery.
Well, that's when they're very young.
They're the newborns, and we can establish a conditioned reflex, which would then
And
argue against your statement of the lack of intellect before 6 months. You can do that as many years old.
They first show recognition, and their eyes first focus when they're how old about?
Oh, anywhere from, I've had them 2 months on, but we know that the vital functions come in when necessary. In other words, respiration is present at birth.
Yeah.
The instigation of the heart beating before birth, and so on.
And these conditioned reflexes can be obtained even with, say, a day-old baby and so
Well,
on?
it takes you about 3 or 4 days to establish them. We're called upon so often on the infants of deaf mutes,
Mm-hmm.
where they want to know if the infant can hear.
Mm-hmm.
And we establish a conditioned reflex of a bell ringing and a painful stimuli, you see.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And after, any number of times, depending on the baby, the bell will ring, nobody sticks it, and the baby owls.
Mm-hmm.
Which tells us it's unperceiving through the ear.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I didn't know about those tests, but look, I could be wrong when it comes to bodily, the way the body and the brain functions at birth. I would know so little about that. That would not come into my knowledge. And if this was possible, the only thing I know that Dianetics was impossible. That was just a Bridie Murphy story. They gave them carte blanche to dream, and they dreamed. And you can go even pre-uteral. You can be part of the semen if they allow you to dream. You know what I mean? I don't believe in that. Yeah.
We have a friend who has a son, and they claim that since the time he was 4 months old, that he always had an allergy in August, the hay fever.
Could be.
The time he was 4 months.
That could be. That could be. I didn't want to give anybody the impression that I thought the intellect first formed at 6 months of age. I merely said that we had never been able to successfully prove that we had taken a person back prior to about 6 months.
How do
Maybe
you
we...
try to cure that? That's what he's asking.
I wouldn't have the slightest knowledge unless I saw the case. I couldn't give you an answer to that, and even then, I would want to know what were the situations. I would probably have to talk to the father and mother and find out what was happening. Maybe the child's awareness wouldn't be such that he could give me an answer as to what was happening. Now, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to just ask you to close your eyes and then test to make sure you can't open them. Then make the numbers disappear. Relax completely and just go all the way down. But don't go quite to the basement because I want to be able to talk to you. Now, the reason I'm going to do this is because since you go so beautifully into the coma state of hypnosis, and we know you can have your baby painlessly that way, what I'm going to do now, and I'm going to let you take your pick of the way you want to have your baby. So, when I have you open your eyes, the oddest thing is going to happen. You just won't be able to remember my name. And I think you know what my name is, don't you? What is it? I'll let you remember it for the time being. What is it?
David.
That's right. But after I bring you out of this state, you won't remember the name when I have you open your eyes, but you won't remember that I gave you the suggestion. All right, when I snap my fingers, you'll be wide awake. All right, now you're wide awake. How do you feel? Good. Now, this is the first thing that I do. First, I make the test to make sure that the true somnambulism is there. You know your name, don't you, just as well as anything? What is it?
Joan Pelham.
And I'll bet you know my name almost as well. What's my name? I see, I made my test. Now I know that I have to be successful. In other words, the glorious thing about this particular phase of hypnosis is that you can test as you go along. Now I know I've got to get the state with it. It's just got to happen, because if they'll do this, they'll go the rest of the way. Is that right, Doctor? Yes. You get them to this, and you know that they'll go the rest of the way. They have no reason for not going the rest of the way. It's a very beautiful state. So now, close your eyes. You'll be right down there again. Now, an odd thing is going to happen after I have you open your eyes this time. I'm going to take a drink of water, and you won't fall asleep when I take the first sip, and you won't fall asleep when I take the second sip, but when I take the third sip of water, you will fall fast and sound asleep. And it'll be just the sleep that you have at night. It won't be a hypnotic rest or sleep. It'll be the same kind of a sleep that you have at night. Now, all this will happen after I have you open your eyes, but you won't remember that we've had this conversation. You will, however, be guided by it. Now, when I have you open your eyes, notice how good you feel this time. Open your eyes, won't you? How do you feel? Good. And you're feeling kind of swell, huh? Tell me, I understand that you went all the way down to coma that time that you were here?
Yes.
And we got a very nice result, isn't that right?
Right.
Mm-hmm. And, see how the mind retains the suggestion. Isn't that beautiful? Now, what I always do at this point, this should clarify it for all of you, I take a stopwatch and I wait until the respirations are down in number. In her case, I'll never get them below, well, until after she's had her baby, of course. But while she's pregnant like this, I could never get her respirations down. She's breathing for 2 people. So, naturally, she's going to breathe oftener. Let's just count the respirations now. Nine respirations in 30 seconds, which means that she's breathing at 18 times per minute. Watch how she falls deeply asleep now, and I'll take the count in a couple of seconds.